Hi everybody and welcome to today's webinar on Salesforce testing and best practice. Let's start in just 1 or 2 seconds to see a few more people joining. Okay, so as I said, welcome to today's webinar. As you can see at the top there's a link to a Google Slides URL. If you type that, you can ask us questions as we go through. Today's webinar is all about testing and Salesforce testing best practice. So what we're trying to give you is a few tips and a few techniques you can bring into your testing to make it better. Introductions to begin with. So I'm Kevin. I'm the CEO of Gearset. Gearset is a release management solution for Salesforce. Helps you manage your releases and deployments between your different developers, between development, QA, UAT, and production, and does a whole lot more besides. One of the things is test monitoring, which we'll come on to. If you want to connect with me later, you can do so on Twitter or LinkedIn, or just reach out to me via the Gearset website. Roped in an expert with me today as well. So,
hi, I'm Nigel. I'm a lead Salesforce developer here at Redgate. We put Salesforce in probably a couple of years ago now with a big integration with our back-end systems. Again, my details are on the page.
Cool, thanks. So let's get started. So not that you guys need it, but a little bit of background on Salesforce. Salesforce is one of the companies that's really had a massive impact in the last decade. Pioneered software as a service before it was fashionable to do so. It has enabled many companies around the world to see rapid operational and sales growth. As developers and admins, it's fair to say that Salesforce doesn't follow the traditional ALM workflow, and it brings a few fresh ideas to development. So there's very little use of source control, I would say, across the Salesforce ecosystem. Most people work directly in orgs. This allows them to be very efficient and see changes quickly. And it allows orgs to evolve quickly and organically. This means that small development or admin teams can support really large user bases, and this would be very difficult to do on other platforms. One of the things that Salesforce is challenging when it comes to is managing change. So Salesforce is a business critical platform. It is maybe the most business critical platform in the world, as we saw last week when they had a slight outage. And managing change in that is important. If your Salesforce org goes down, that costs your business real money. Some of the things that make change challenging is the lack of rollback. So when you make a change, it's important to understand the consequences of that change because it's tricky to roll back. This requires discipline on the part of developers and admins to manage that change effectively and prevent bugs from creeping in. But Salesforce encourages end users to make changes directly in orgs. That's the power of it. That's what we all love about it so much. So how do you balance all of these things? And one of the best ways of balancing it is to have very solid tests. Having great tests protects you from disaster and allows you to make those changes directly in production knowing there's a safety net. So why do we test? Well, unfortunately for most of us, the reason is because Salesforce makes us. So Salesforce enforce a requirement to have tests as you move from sandbox to production. And they have this further requirement to have 75% code coverage. So for a lot of developers and admins out there, unfortunately, they see testing as this thing they have to do just to get Salesforce to get off their back. Why should we test? It's really to protect your investment against changes later, erroneous changes later. So you want to be able to make changes in the future and do so confidently, even if they're your own changes. So we've all written some code and then 6 months or a year later had to change it. Couldn't quite remember what we did the first time or why we did it the way we did it, and bugs can creep in. So tests, and good tests in particular, can really help with that. It'll help you accurately represent business requirements. So the best way to really know if you've encoded a business rule or some logic properly is by trying to test it, by trying to break it, by breaking your assumptions around the code that you've written, and tests provide a very great way to do that. And something that's a little bit unique to Salesforce is that it helps Salesforce reliably update orgs during platform releases. They run all of our tests before they do their updates, and that's great for us because they know if they have introduced bugs on their end. And it's great for us because we know that when Salesforce updates one of our orgs, if our tests still pass, that's great, we'll have no problems. So some of the benefits of good tests, as I said, you get to catch problems early while they're easy to fix. So hopefully you get that instant feedback, you're making that change, you get the notification from your test framework saying a test or an assumption or a tripwire has been tripped, and your head is in the space, you understand the rules, you understand what you're doing, and you get to fix it there and then. Proves our code works, which is fantastic, and keeps us honest, so we have to really be very concrete and very specific about what our code does and what it doesn't do. And all of that allows us to reduce the risk of change. So we can make sweeping or large changes to production orgs, and we can trust that if our tests pass, they tell us the change is safe. We can roll that into production, and our sales teams and our service teams and our marketing teams won't be affected. And one of the great things about tests is because they're, at least good tests, are deterministic, we can just run them again and again, and we can know that if they pass in the future, then everything is still good. But not all tests are good tests, and I'm sure we've all seen plenty of bad tests out in the wild. Bad tests are worse than no tests at all. Often they provide an absolute maintenance headache. You try to make a small change and all of your tests start failing in random ways that you can't understand, random assertions that don't have good messages, and they just become a burden. As I said, genuinely, having bad tests is worse than having no tests because they provide you with a false sense of security. But if they don't test or protect the things you care most about, then you think you're safe, but you're not. Of course, you may just be testing the wrong behavior. Some people will write the code first and then write the test afterwards to make that code pass, just to verify the behavior of what they've written, without truly thinking about the business rules or the business logic that they're trying to encode. And they can stagnate or become blockers to deployments. So again, more often badly written tests, but all tests to a degree. Things change in production, our assumptions change, our business requirements, our business rules change, business process changes, and those tests can stagnate or hurt deployments in the future. So I'll hand over to Nigel now, who'll go through some of the best practice for Salesforce unit tests.
Hi, so these are a few things we've come up with over the last couple of years. When we started on Salesforce development, we were pretty green. We were all used to writing unit tests in our C# code and whatever. But and if you Google around for unit test best practice, you'll see a whole wealth of information on the internet for these things. So I want to focus today on 5 things we've come up with as for Salesforce testing in particular. The first one is isolation. A unit test should only test like the smallest amount of code possible, and to do that properly, you need to isolate it. Make sure it's only getting just isolate the bit of code that you want to do. So you only want data applicable for that test. And one thing in Salesforce is if you have see your data equals true on your test, then it can see the whole org data. So it's always worth explicitly putting on see your data equals false in your test classes at the start of them. It is the default now. It hasn't always been. But if you call it out there, it makes it explicitly clear to everyone who comes into the future. The reason you do this is if otherwise when you move from your sandbox test to your production organization, suddenly your test fails because the data is different in the production, or if an end user makes changes to it, data in the end, your tests start failing. So whenever you can, turn off your data. The second one is the arrange, act, assert. This is again a standard for unit tests in all code, but even more so in Salesforce, getting the data up properly. So you can see on the left here we have the first 3 lines there, setting up the data correctly, getting it right, and again we've pulled out the actual creation of data to a separate method to make it clearer. So your test is compact, it's easy to read. When you come into it, it's fairly obvious. The actual data creation is in a separate method. Then you act on it when we do the update here, and then afterwards make sure you assert. A test that doesn't assert or check something's correct is not a test at all. I have seen people in the past where they've actually just made a test. Literally, the test was called Test for Code Coverage, and it was a test which just executed some code, gave you the coverage, but didn't actually check what it was doing was correct, and therefore it's utterly useless, and provides you that false sense of security that Kevin mentioned earlier. So always make sure arrange, act, assert. A third thing is to make sure you have some tests running as real user profiles. Apex code runs in a system level, can see all the properties and things. When your users are actually using the system, they're using it as they see it. So make sure if you want a sales user to do something and they're running on a standard profile, have a test that runs as a standard profile. Again, you can see how we've done this here. We have a create user method on the right-hand side here. Just gets the profile, standard user, create some test user in it. When we come back into it, we can then act on the data as that particular user, and again assert at the end that whatever we're testing makes sense of it. In this case, we're testing the user can see the email and the contact. The third thing for Salesforce is make sure you use the test start test and test stop test. These again, so you go back to now the original test. I missed it off for brevity on the other test ones. This is the original test again, and you can see we do the arrange first of all, set your data up, test.start test. This gives you a new set of governor limits when you're doing the acting. So as you know in Salesforce Apex, you also have limits on CPU time, how many statements you can execute on the database, a whole raft of things. Test.start test resets that, gives you a whole new limits for your actual test to run on. Do whatever you have to do, and then stop test. This does two things. First of all, it puts you back to the original governor limits, so you can now carry on doing more stuff like before. But also it will run anything that's been asynchronous. So we have some code in organization whereby you do something, you add a new lead, you add a new contact or something. We have some future methods which are called from that, which does something in the future. In the test environment, we don't want to wait for that. So in test.stop test means that I execute anything in the future now, and then I can assert that future stuff also works. I can test my future methods as well using this method. And the last one we want to go for is make sure you always exercise your triggers in bulk. Again, for doing testing functionality, just send a single object through your triggers, make sure they all work fine, but at least have one test per trigger, which is calling it with more than one object. Triggers can be called with more than one object all the time, so make sure you aim for about 10 or 20 I put down here. You're testing here that your triggers work with more than one object. Make sure you've code written safely. It doesn't rely on any statics or anything that's the same between object to object. The reason you don't want to do too many on these things, you're not testing the limits here. Sandboxes tend to run on slow machines. We've seen sandboxes time out where production will run fine. So you're not trying to stress it out because your sandboxes start failing. Make sure you do just this, make sure your test works.
Thanks, Nigel. So hopefully we're all going to take those kinds of tips and all of the other best practice and start writing great tests. But Salesforce has some challenges that are unique to that platform, and even with the best structured and best written tests in the world, there are still some problems. One of the big problems is the lack of automation. So that makes it very slow to get feedback on changes. There's also this obsession with correlating code coverage and the goodness of your tests. People strive for higher and higher code coverage. And code coverage is a good indicator, but it doesn't mean that you've written good tests. Also, changes made by end users can cause silent test failures if you don't have that automation in place. So Gearset provides an option where you can automate your unit tests. You can set this up with just a few clicks. It doesn't take very long at all, and I'll show you in a second how to do it. It allows you to track your code coverage and test status over time. Quickly debug failures, so when we run your tests for you every night, if there's a failure, you can really quickly see what caused that test to fail and hopefully get to the resolution more quickly. We have full alerting, so every night we'll run your tests. If there's a failure, we'll send you or your team an email or a text message on your cell phone, or we can notify you via Chatter or Slack. And it allows you to track all your tests across all orgs in one place. So if you've got quite a few developer instances and sandboxes and UAT and production, and there's a lot of change happening across all of those environments, this gives you one place to check all of your tests and know what's happening. And finally, it's completely free. So this is a feature that we've built for the community. We think it's a great thing to run your tests and get notified, so we're giving this one away just totally free. So let's do a demo. So I'm going to just start at the start. I'll go to gearset.com. So as I said, Gearset is our release management service, which allows you to manage all of your releases across Salesforce. I'll just zoom out a bit because that's a little bit broken. To get started with, you click Try It Now, and that brings you over to the Gearset app. You log into Gearset with either your Salesforce credentials or your Google credentials. I'm going to log in with Google just because that's where I have things configured. And this takes you to the main flow in Gearset, which is all about release management, automation around deployments, and monitoring your orgs to check for changes in configuration. But for today's webinar, we're going to focus on the scheduled tests. So here you can see I've got one test monitor already set up, and it tells me all of my tests are passing. But I want to show you how easy it is to set up a new test monitor. So you notice that I was able to log into Gearset within about 2 clicks there, and test monitors are simple as well. Simply select Add New Job, give it a name. So this is Test Monitor for Webinar. Choose an organization. So I've already got one of my stagings. So let's just choose some dev instance, and then go to the notification settings. So I can choose if I want to send notifications in every run. So every night I'd get that email saying, hey, all your tests have passed, or this test has started failing. Or I can choose to only get notified when there's a test that has failed. For now, let's leave it on every run. I want to get some visibility into my whole team, so I'm going to email team@gearset.com every time there's a test run. Because it's just a dev instance, I'm not going to set up a cell text message, but for production, we do have that set up. Similarly for Slack, we don't really need it, but Chatter is useful just to have that ambient knowledge. So every evening, there'll be a post on Chatter telling me what my test status is. Save that, and here you can see it's pending first check, so this evening that will run. But let's look at this staging environment that I've already set up. So it tells me my tests are passing. I can jump into the details for this org, and here we see the result of every single test run every evening since early February when we had this feature in pilot. And this is interesting, so it failed today. If I jump in, I can see which of my tests have passed. They're good. I can see which of my tests have failed. So here is a test that has failed. It's got a cert exception. Cert exception. We expect the accounts have at most one account executive, but actually had 2. So now I know there's something wrong. I can go dig into this test, and I can see what code change or data change introduced that bug. So let's just jump back to the demo. And I'll just get the questions going again. Sorry. Okay, so there's the questions again, so if you did have anything. When I was preparing for this demo, I looked up some of our statistics just on how many tests we've run. And as of this morning, we just passed 300 tests run for our users. And interestingly, 12,000 of those had test failures. So that's around 12,000 tests that 12,000 out of 300,000 tests that failed that users weren't expecting. So I also reached out to some of our users to ask them for any stories if Gearset had told them something they weren't expecting. And we got one back from a customer where they had their tests passing every evening. It's their production org. Nothing was going wrong. And then they started seeing a failure. And the failure that they saw was that Salesforce, so you have the 3 large releases every year, but there are smaller releases happening all the time as well. And without making a public announcement, Salesforce subtly changed the way they handle mixed DML operations and tests. So out of nowhere, their tests started failing one night. And it was only thanks to Gearset that they were able to spot it right away and figure out that it was not any work that they had done that had broken the tests, but Salesforce updating itself. And that's much better for them than waiting until one of the developers fails to deploy their work and maybe failing to deploy their work during a critical release window because of a subtle change inside Salesforce. So as I alluded to during that demo, Gearset does more than just unit testing. So Salesforce, Gearset is one of the leading release management solutions. We take a fundamentally unique or different approach to doing release management. And what Gearset has baked into it is an understanding of your Salesforce metadata. So we'll pull apart things like profiles, permission sets, and then stitch them back together to try and create packages that work first time. So no more iteratively building a package, deploying it, watching it fail, build it, watch it fail, build it, watch it fail. Gearset gets it right first time. It allows you to easily compare and deploy changes between orgs. It provides simple reporting and audit, automation and monitoring, as I've alluded to. The other automation that we have is around monitoring your production org for configuration changes. So any metadata changes that happen to your production org, we'll tell you about and notify you about, again, via chatter, SMS, or email. And there's a free 30-day trial, so you can try it out as you're trying out the test runner. Obviously, I'm the CEO of the company. I'm going to say lots of nice things about Gearset, but our customers have said some really, really positive things about us as well, which you can read about on our sites. We have a few case studies and white papers that we've done with different people. A lot of it focuses around the time savings that people have. So you had people that were doing 8, 9, 10-hour release windows, and with Gearset, they get that down to an hour or so. So the key takeaways from today's webinar, testing isn't optional, and you shouldn't view testing as this thing that Salesforce puts in your way that you have to try and get around. When writing good tests have a lot of benefits. It reduces risk of change. That's the primary thing it gives you. It proves your code works. It provides executable documentation. So if you've got really great tests with understood inputs and understood outputs, then that's the best way to describe what your system should be doing. And should make your life easier. Should make the lives of developers and admins everywhere a lot easier. And Gearset's free test suite automation helps with that as well. So thank you very much today, guys. There's some resources here on the Salesforce websites around how to write good unit tests if you want to do further reading. And there's some links out to our blog to tell you just how to get started with testing and why testing is important on the Salesforce platform. We'll send this in an email afterwards, so don't stress about getting these down now. So with that, I'll move to questions. If you open that link, Google Slides ZS4U9, and we'll give you a second or two to ask a question. Okay, seems like we don't have any questions at the minute. If you do have any questions after the webinar, if you're watching this on YouTube later and you want to follow up on anything, just email us, team@gearset.com, and I'll either answer it or else I'll forward to Nigel if it's something that's beyond my expertise. So with that, thank you very much, guys, and enjoy the rest of your day.